My name is Ian Goodale. I'm the European Studies librarian, and I'm very excited to introduce Dr. Mary Neuburger, who is the director for the Center for Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies here at UT. She's also a professor of history, and she started this entire Prague Spring Archive project that we worked on here at the libraries in collaboration with her. She's going to be talking a little bit about the archive and the way she's used it in her teaching, and then hopefully lead a conversation about the future of using archives like this in pedagogy and integrating digital projects into teaching in the future. So I'll hand it over to her. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you. So first I'm going to talk a little bit about the collection itself and my kind of goals for expanding it, actually. And then I'll kind of get down to the details of how I've used it in the classroom, but also how I plan to use it in the classroom in the future. And then I'm hoping that people will have suggestions, particularly on that sort of pedagogical possibilities for using this collection in the classroom, but also even the kind of public face of this project and how we might use it in kind of more outreach, making it available to assignments, for example, that we use in the classroom, making those available so that people across campus or even K through 12 teachers, for example, could see them, and because this is an open source collection. So I guess for me, the idea of this started in 2010 when I was writing a Title VI grant, which is for people who don't know, Title VI funds are global area studies centers, and I'm currently the director of the Center for Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies. That center had lost its grant in the previous cycle, right before I took the job on. And so we had spent the last 4 years just killing ourselves to look really good for the next grant cycle. Well, there's a library section on this grant where you first brag about everything your library has, and then you put in money for something you want to do to kind of up the ante on your area for the library. Well, so I knew I wanted to put in collections money, which we have in the past, but I also knew that we were kind of good on collections money in some ways. We didn't really need a lot more, and also that it felt like very much a proposal from the past eras. And I wanted to do something to make this proposal look more like looking to the future. And so I decided that creating a digital collection of some kind of materials that were here at UT would be the best way to do this. And so I kind of went around campus looking for possibilities. And the HRC, for example, had a few small collections I was interested in, but they were really guarded about any kind of scanning or digitizing and even like there was a tiny collection I was interested in. I was told, well, that would be $100,000 because we would need a project manager. And I was like, what? So I was like, that's not going to work. But when I went and talked to some of the LBJ Presidential Archive and Library archivists, who I had worked with because I had brought students there before to do projects on site on a pretty small scale, they said, well, if we work with you, it's really complicated because we're a federal institution, but if you do it on your own, you can have whatever's there, just scan it and it's yours, and you can do whatever you want with it. And I said, okay, that's the ticket. So I kind of put it into the grant, not knowing sort of who would do what or how we would make it work. And I decided to focus on these country file boxes, because although there are materials scattered throughout that archive related to foreign policy on kind of every country, they also have these country files, which makes it really convenient because it's a concentration of materials on that country in a kind of nice little sort of concentrated space. And so I decided to focus on those, and a lot of them are actually copies too that you might find in the CIA, and other kind of files, intelligence or memos and things like that. So it was a nice kind of place to focus. And I decided to focus on the Czechoslovak files for two reasons. One, because Prague Spring was one of the most arguably important events of the Cold War period, and it happened under the LBJ administration. And so there was actually a wealth of documents on that because they were, trying to figure out what to do as the crisis unfolded. But also because we have an ample Czech archive. So I knew if the money ran out, that we always had, like if something happened where we needed to pull on our own resources, which we did do a few times, that we had a little pool of money that we could go to. And so it made sense to do that one first. And I teach East European history as well. So I mean, first I went over and I, I actually looked through these folder by folder. And I'm like, well, there's a few documents in there that aren't interesting, but for the most part, they're all interesting. So let's, and this was Mary Rader talking to her too. She goes, just do all of them. Don't cherry pick through. Let's just, you know, in their entirety, do these boxes. Because it's not, maybe Ian, do you know how many? I think it's like 2,000. Is it 2,000 documents or 2,000 pages? 2,000 documents. And some documents are longer. Some are 10, 15, 20 pages. Some are 1 page. So, you know, I don't know exactly the number of pages. It's probably 4,000, 6,000, something like that. So, working with the libraries, we had students do a lot of the digitization, but then working with Ian Goodale and also some of the other library before him, some of the other library, and I think there's probably all kinds of people on the back end doing work on this. These were scanned to the right specs and made so searchable. Metadata was created, and they were put in Texas Scholar Works, and they're a searchable collection, which is also really nice. So you can kind of word search the collection for particular names or things like that. But Texas Scholar Works, when I saw the portal, I'm like, this looks like hard to use. You know, for someone from the outside, they would look at it and they would see this tiny little Prague Spring and what's in there. And so this was working then with Ian Goodale. He created, when I say we, I mean him. But very much like in consultation about, well, wouldn't it be cool if we had, you know, this was kind of an example of like someone who kind of knows the content and what they want to see, working with someone who knows the technology and what it can do, and kind of the back and forth required with that. And then Ian also put in a lot of his own ideas. Ian created this Scalar Portal. And actually that happened in the context of while I was teaching a graduate seminar it's actually an interdisciplinary gateway course for our MA program. And this wasn't by any means the focus of the course, but we had several sessions where I kind of talked to the students about, well, what should it look like? We have this collection. What should the website look like? What should it do? And so we kind of brainstormed together. And then we had the students help us create some of the text for the guide. And do you want to like scroll through some of that? And so basically this Scalar Portal will get you, it links kind of in and out of Texas Scholar Works, so it takes you in there to search the individual documents, but it gives you this general information. As you can see, it has two of the boxes. There's one more box that we don't have in there yet. But actually, why don't you first show, in addition to the boxes that you'll see in a second, we also have kind of key figures. And this is important personages, and we have it kind of broken down to American and kind of Eastern Bloc folks. And if you go to them, it sort of gives a little information on who they are. And if you click on their name, it'll go to documents in which they're named. And so that's kind of, you know, I think like for the uninitiated, I think like this would be really great for students in general, because they kind of get, oh, okay, these are the people involved. These are the key players. And then you can see there the documents that it links to related to, you know, and some of the named people are going to be kind of constant and others less so. Okay, and then go back to the boxes. Yeah, and so then down below we have the Eastern Bloc kind of players. We also have a timeline, and this is something that Ian did, which I think is really awesome, but I think we could also, using the documents themselves, I think we could probably do more with kind of timelines. But you can scroll through, and that's even a speech. And some of those materials we have in the archive, so we have copies of his speeches translated into English. So the beauty is everything's in English. I mean, it's for student use, I mean, this is like a really good thing. Okay, and then do you want to go back to the boxes? So with the boxes, what's nice about that, we also picked out some key documents so that if a teacher wanted to just kind of assign some documents, having parsed through and saying, these ones look interesting and kind of more important, then an instructor could assign them, because otherwise there is a little bit of a digging through the box a student might have to do to find something, or it'd be like this memo, which sometimes, there's not a lot of information in those memos. But what I really like is under the boxes we have these folder descriptions. So you can see each box has these number of folders. You can see how many pages are in the folder, which was something I wanted to do because, if you're assigning it to students, for example, it's like you want to know if you're assigning them 100 pages or 10, or some of the folders are smaller, so I would give a student 2, because, and so you can see these are the little blurbs that the graduate students wrote. And did you do some editing on those to kind of standardize them? But they basically, I said, just kind of summarize what's in there, what time period, what kinds of materials, so that people can see. And the beauty of that is, like, if you're just interested in the Soviet invasion, then you can go to the folder on the Soviet invasion. Or if you're just interested in the reactions after the Soviet invasion, happened in August of '68, you can go to the reactions. So these I think are really nice as far as any kind of use for, I think, researchers and students in the classroom, actually. And so in expanding this, I think we want to first get that last box in there. But then the idea is to expand it into a larger Cold War online project. First, we're going to do the other East European country boxes, I think, just because it's small, it's more manageable. So we have, like one. Some of the countries have like one box, But we're working on Yugoslavia. I don't know how many. That's, I think, just one box, isn't it? Or one box. We've done some Romania too. Yeah. So I think we're going to first do, the countries of Eastern Bloc, Eastern Europe, and then after that, probably start dipping into the Soviet stuff. But the Soviet collection is really massive. So for that, I think we'll definitely want to go through those boxes and be a little bit more, possibly be more selective. But on the other hand, I think this is kind of a long-term project, so there's no hurry, in a sense. But I think it'll be great once we have the different countries to have them be internally searchable, but then possibly the collection as a whole searchable, looking for different issues that one might want to do kind of cross-block comparisons of, certain issues that come up in these boxes. So these are, of course, foreign policy documents. A lot of them come out of the State Department, but there's a lot of CIA intelligence. So there's a lot, I think, not just from the foreign policy perspective, but that even just kind of understanding domestically what's going on, there's a lot of dense intelligence about what's going on. So it's really, and even, things like translated speeches or things coming from the embassy where they say this is what's going on in the economy, culture, this is what they're saying in the press, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of really useful information, I think, for students studying this region and this period. And it's such an interesting and important period for Eastern Europe. So it's a real treasure trove, and there's nothing like it as far as I know. There are some smaller kind of Cold War collections, but very cherry-picked, where it's sort of like, here's a document on this, here's a document on that, but not, sort of whole collections, at least in the English language stuff. And I think it's kind of surprising how little they're digitizing. But part of it is they're really pretty understaffed over in the LBJ library, from what I've heard. It's like, so they're actually excited about it too. Okay, so we want to expand that moving forward. Now let me talk a little bit about how I've used it in the classroom so far, and then my plans for using it more in the classroom. Now I hope researchers will use this too, and I'm trying to, let people know about it as much as possible. But for me, my focus is more at this point getting students involved in looking at it as a research tool, or even just a lot of students have never been in an archive before. And so in some cases, what I'll do is I'll assign an assignment with this where they're looking at it online, but I also make them go over there physically and give them an assignment where they have to go pull a box and look at a folder. So I don't want it to totally replace the physical archival experience. But I think it's also, because of its searchability, it's a totally different kind of possibilities than having digging through boxes and folders as a researcher. So far I've used it in kind of smaller assignments with students in 2 different classes that I'm going to talk about. But my goal is, I don't teach a lot right now since I'm director, but is to teach a course where we really, the whole semester is kind of on the Cold War, and where we do a lot more with this collection and with the physical LBJ collection. And so one of the courses is the one I mentioned, where it's a graduate course, where I was trying to get them in from the ground level, like, okay, we're building this, what should we do? And I think they can, I'm teaching that this next fall too, both help us get more into the guide, but also look at this and kind of for usability. Like, I found a few broken links, like help us go in as kind of testers and make sure it's working really well. But also, I hope I can get them to work with me on possible different kinds of visualizations, of the data. And I don't, like, I'm not a real tech savvy person, but but I'm trying, and it's just kind of exciting to me. And I think, like, for our students, it's so critical for them to have digital literacy skills, whether they're PhD students, whether they're master's students, whatever they're doing. This is like the kind of stuff they need to have on their resume and need to know how to do. I think it's just such value added for them. I mean, I was telling Ian, I just kind of, like, yesterday actually, I just pulled one of the metadata sheets, which has populated with so much information, into Tableau platform just to see. And I immediately saw this, oh, you can graph, like, when all the, there's a flurry of telegrams that day, and, that kind of thing. I was like, I had never thought about trying to visualize it like that, but because all the dates are in there, but there's names that we may be able to do different kinds of network analysis with, or even map out, like, what are the major concerns. I just gave a co-talk with Jeremy Suri about this the other night, and I actually brought up that I thought one of the reasons we didn't respond to the invasion, like, we just kind of went, okay, there was no sort of counter-intervention, was because this reform movement, for people who don't know what was going on, there was this major reform movement that really became part of this popular outpouring of mostly kind of a student movement, but also cultural flowering, a real openness and really kind of exploded in sort of film and literature and debates in the newspapers because of this reformist regime that came into power and building on some reformist kind of movement before that. But I was actually saying, well, one of the reasons we didn't do anything is because even though it was reformist, they were still communist. In other words, they weren't saying, oh, we want democracy and capitalism. Not at all. And Jeremy Suri said, no, I don't think that was a factor. And it's like, well, I'm going to be looking that up, Jeremy, because I think it was. And I think, like, one of the things I was thinking of doing for graduate students, for example, is giving them, and I give them anyway, I gave them this article, for example, on the politics of collective inaction, written by a scholar about NATO's lack of response to Prague Spring. And I noticed in this that he actually doesn't use, he uses some of the documents available in DC, but it's pretty clear he hasn't been into the LBJ archive. And giving students something like that and saying, okay, find some information that puts his work into question. Find something he left out, find something he got wrong, give them a really specific, make them engage with a scholar who has kind of tried to lay down, what this was all about and come up with something different. So that's kind of more along the lines of traditional scholarship versus, like, visualization, but some of those visualization tools, or even word search a certain thing and you find out that, wow, everybody's saying this is communist, we can't do it. Everyone's saying they're supporting the Viet Cong, we can't do this right now, we're in the middle of the Vietnam War issue, these guys they're killing our boys, they're, like, sending money to the Viet Cong. What are the factors? And I think that could be a really cool way on the graduate level, but actually I think undergraduates could do that well too, especially in a smaller kind of seminar course, which is how I'm envisioning initially an undergrad course. So some of these things could be both undergrad and grad. But one assignment that I did do with the undergrads, which was different, was in a, so we have, this is the program for Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies. We have a graduate MA and then we have an undergraduate degree. Both of them are interdisciplinary. And both have gateway courses. And both courses I've been involved in kind of restructuring and teaching over the last few years. Also handing them off to other faculty and kind of training them, but also trying to get them to use those classes to try different kinds of methods. So, and it's been really successful with some faculty and less so with others, but it's a fun, you know, kind of way to bring all the faculty that teach in those areas into a almost kind of a workshopping, I think, environment. But so for the undergrad course, which has about between 60, 70 people usually each time, we've been able to book some of the labs here because there's no rooms with movable chairs for that size of class here at UT, or there's maybe one, I don't know, or there is at UT, but they're in the sciences and they're not available to liberal arts. And so that's been a struggle. But so what we did is we booked certain sessions here in some of these library labs. And so one session, I had the students take these folders, and they were broken up into teams in this course anyway that they work with throughout the semester. And so each team, you know, was sitting at a table, but even prior to the session, each team was assigned a folder to look at. You know, as you can see here, each folder has between 100 and, you know, like 50 or 100 pages. So as a team, they were supposed to read every document in that folder before class. And I said, go ahead and assign them out if you want. You don't have to all read all of them. You know, you could be like, I'll read documents 1, 2, you read 3, 4, you know. Parse them out, read them. So then when they came to class, I said, okay, the Prague Spring Czechoslovak crisis actually is what the LBJ administration called it, has unfolded. The Soviets have invaded. We did nothing. So now we're going to try and assess whether that was the right thing. Should we have done something? Was it okay not to do anything? You know, pretend like you're a subcommittee in the Senate assessing that foreign policy outcome and then either criticizing the president for what he did or supporting him and saying he did the right thing. So the students were all like, well, my document, and I said, you have to pull evidence from your documents, and then towards the end of the class, you have to choose one team member who's gonna get up for like basically 2 or 3 minutes and say, we support the president because, or the president did the wrong thing. He should have intervened for this reason. And so then I kind of set the students loose and walked around, and it was cute. They were like pulling up, well, my document says, you know, and they all had something to bring to the table because they had read different things, and then they were kind of scrolling back through. But then I also said, if you want, you can search the collection. It's for more on a certain issue. If you know, you feel like you don't have enough evidence or you want to back up your evidence from documents outside your folder, you can do an all collection search. And so they did, and I think it really went well because they were engaging the material and trying to think through arguments and coming up with the main arguments. And then they did really well in their presentations. But then afterwards, it was great because I wasn't teaching the course that semester. There was 2 other faculty co-teaching it. And so then I said, what could we have done better? I mean, it went well, and you know, asking Ian. And what I realized I should have done was made half of them argue against and half of them for, because all of them argued for. They all said, yeah, we did the right thing, you know. And they had evidence, which was fine, but it's like, well, you know, there was plenty of evidence there too to say, like, this is outrageous, we should have intervened, you know. We have big Czech population in the United States. People were writing in saying we have to do something. We had encouraged reform movements there. How can we just let them crush this one? I mean, you know, one can come up with arguments, but they were a little bit lazy on that front because it was sort of easier to find these other kind of arguments. So, yeah.
I also love that idea in this time when we are only seeing things from one perspective. That kind of forces you to see the other
side. Yeah.
Or you still might hold your
Yeah, you're looking for evidence, even if you don't. Yeah, so kind of looking for the other side. So it's an ongoing process. It's for me, it's a little bit like new territory, but it's fun. It's like, okay, I'm gonna just. I mean, even when I assign them to read the stuff, I'm like, I don't know what I'm gonna have them do with it. So it was literally the night before, like, okay, I'm gonna have them do. I was coming up with these ideas on the spot, and I think it's working with faculty to try and encourage this kind of thing. If they can see concrete examples of something that you've done, they're more likely to go, oh, that's something, that sounds cool, I can try that. But it is hard even, as a faculty member to sort of go, okay, I have all this stuff, I have it online, what can I have them do in the classroom? And it's not always, I think doing more like really technology-based stuff is great too, and having them dig into kind of visualizations and that kind of thing, but it doesn't have to be. It can also be that kind of thing where they're just using it as a tool to find information, but then they could be delivering it in more traditional ways, like writing essays, or debating things, having presentations, or challenging scholarship, that kind of thing. So I think there's a lot of potential for this, and as a historian, it's really exciting. I just can't tell you how doing my research is always this, it's such a digging through looking for needles in haystacks, kind of arduous task of looking for things. And if I had, a lot of the project I'm working on right now, if it was digitized like this, I would just be like, oh, it could save me hours and hours. And so easy to find stuff, again, that I think I read something, but where is it now, So I think it's going to be the long-term potential of this for both researchers, and I think more and more will find it, including in the Czech Republic, where they have a huge interest, of course, in this as part of their own history, and where actually it's become like a little bit of a battlefield there for just the memory of this event, because they don't all agree on what it meant for their past. I think this will be really interesting for them, but also I think there's a lot of potential for students in different kinds of classes. Yeah.
Maybe for Ian, is there potential here for libraries in that country to work with you to share it more broadly?
Right, or even link to some of their documents. Again, that gets into you need students with those language skills, but we do have students studying Czech, and we do teach Czech, of course, and then they have those kind of language skills. So I don't know, you were in Prague, right? And you talked to some people about this, didn't you? Yeah.
I was planning to. I think it
Mm-hmm.
was kind of too short notice to get in touch with them,
Mm-hmm.
but we talked about it shortly before I left. But I have been in touch with European digital archives, and we're interested in linking to each other's projects and sharing materials that way. And they have some involvement from Czech libraries and universities.
Okay. Talk about students being able to interact via whatever with students at those universities to talk about how they view it versus how the Americans view it and Richard.
Yeah, for the Czech project, I haven't linked with someone in particular on that idea, but for the Yugoslav project, for example, we have a partner who's actually coming in April. You have to meet her, who's at the University of Zagreb, and who, she's been working with us back and forth on different kinds of stuff, and she's really interested in this. And we've talked about doing something jointly with one of her classes. She does a lot on this period. And with one of ours where students, with the time difference, sometimes it's hard, but or they do a blog together, or they do something where they kind of exchange views, because I think their perspectives are going to be so different on these, events than for our students. But it was in Yugoslavia, there was lots of protests at the time, not just because of this, certainly after the invasion, but before. Yugoslavia was a much freer environment anyway, and in fact, in many ways, a model for the Prague Spring. So even in terms of this event, I think it's really interesting to look at the other country files and the ways they reacted. Romania, for example, refused to be part of the Warsaw Pact invasion because Nicolae Ceausescu was actually also at the time very reformist. Later, he became a totally evil dictator. But at the time, he was seen as one of the most reformists in Eastern Europe. And so they refused to take part in the invasion, and they were pretty sure they were going to get invaded. So they were tracking the Soviet troops, and all of our intelligence was on it. And, well, nope, they didn't. So they thought they were the next to be invaded, and they were not. So, you know, it's such an interesting global moment. I mean, in the history department, they're doing a global 1968 panel in a couple of weeks. You know, things are happening in Paris, the United States, everywhere. So the documents really are global. One of the folders is global reactions to this invasion, you know, and I love that folder because it's really interesting to see, you know, all the sort of communist countries say, oh, the reactionaries took over Czechoslovakia, the fascists are there, and now we've gone back in and established order. You know, and they have this like totally warped idea of what happened. But so, you know, versus other countries that are, you know, in shock and up in arms about what happened. But it's really neat to kind of see that in that folder. So there's a lot of stuff like that in there that, like, there's an article right in that folder, I swear. Yeah.
Yeah, Mary, so this is so exciting for me to think about in terms of undergraduate research, because you want to start your undergraduates doing real critical thinking and challenging scholarship, and it's really hard.
It is.
They don't have the background, they don't have access to material, they don't feel they can challenge scholarship at all. But with new information and new bits that they can pour through, I mean, this is central to not only their learning about history and ways of approaching history and questioning it, but just critical thinking in general.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's very exciting.
Thanks. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of potential. Yeah.
Your work is such a beautiful reflection also looking at the intersection of archives and technology. It's like a little bit like Hannah's book that she presented not so long ago. Which you're using, it's not quite as old as the Primeros Libros project, but you know, it's preserved so that the next generation can learn about it. And it is using the analog material to work with students who, these are graduate students, are they not 21st century students?
Yes.
They
Yeah.
are. Okay. So students who would love to use this and work in the technology environment and so on, and probably help enrich the resources technologically also. So it's we hear so much about, especially now, about the importance of the book or the printed or the analog materials. And of course it's important, but also how can we use that to work at the intersection of advancing technologically for different kinds of research or critical thinking over technology.
Yeah, and I think some historians are still skeptical about, like, I mean, you know, some of the older generation, about, you know, can it really help my research to be able to well, not just, I mean, searchability, yes, I think we all agree. But what about visualizations? And I think a lot of historians are still skeptical that that can make a difference. But I think once you start doing them and you go, oh, I didn't think that, you know, it hadn't occurred to me once I see that there was something, you know, that I think that we can use that to actually advance research.
And do different research.
And do different kinds of research, yeah. And also different kinds of public scholarship. And so that's, involving students in that, I think, is something really exciting. I mean, we've done little bits of that through Joan Neuburger, which is a totally different person than me. But who's running not even past, one of the things working with her that I've done is had students, yes, mostly, I've done this mostly with graduate students, but they'll go find like one document they find really interesting in the actual library. That's one of the ones I make them go over there. And then they scan that one document and then they write a little kind of, you know, story or essay on it, kind of analyzing it. We give them a little guidance. And then she posts that on Not Even Past. And that's kind of more these one-off things. But to get them and to go a little deeper and look at the scholarship on it and sort of engage it would be you know, something really great to do in a class. Even just find one article on it. Now let's challenge it, you know, on different kinds of topics. So we're just really lucky to have this treasure trove here. I mean, and they have a little bit digitized, you can see, I mean, not of this collection, very little, but they have a little bit digitized on their own webpage, but it's really minimal, actually. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you more about the platform, about Scalar. And, are you satisfied with Scalar? And do you feel like you can keep pushing further with new technologies within the Scalar platform? Because that's the thing about technology. There's always going to be something bigger and better to work with, and sustaining a site like this. But Scalar seems to be a very popular platform for academics. Is there anything that you weren't happy with about it, or could you do without the timeline? Because a lot of platforms, timeline seems to be very important now.
I think the timeline is really important, and I'd like to find more ways somehow to have the documents kind of link into the timeline or create different kinds of timelines. So yeah, I think that's critical. I guess, you know, since the collections in Texas Scholarworks, there's a lot of kind of going back and forth that happens, and I think that's probably inevitable. But so maybe this is more of a Texas Scholarworks problem rather than a Scalar problem. But one thing I'd like to do just be open a folder and look through it, like, you know, those kind of reader kind of functions where you're just reading a book. But now you have to kind of go clicking back and forth to get to the next document. And it's a little bit clunky. And we were, even with students, we were trying to have them find particular ones, like giving them the title and search for it. And it was this, I had to give a pretty detailed description on how to, okay, go into this link, go into that. But what would be nice, and so maybe this is more for Texas backend, because I don't know if it can, I don't know how that, if you can pull it in and do it, but is like really for people who are, you know, I mean, it requires less sort of explanation. And for people who can't figure, I can see people going in and going, wait, how do I, and Ian wrote a big user guide. And they can, but you know, a lot of people don't bother to read that. But if you could just go, oh, here's the folder, click, here, I'm scrolling through it. Like I would, like it's sitting in front of me. That would be really cool. I don't know, I guess if it had other kinds of visualization functions, but I think we can do that in other platforms and bring them in. I don't know if anyone's seen a really cool timeline function that I've seen elsewhere is, I don't know if anyone's seen Erica Basumik's CleoViz platform that she developed. She just showed us in a PTF meeting. It's really cool because it's a timeline where you can also, there's also sort of a network within it, and so you can link events or people, and they get bigger the more often they show up in, you know, the sort of little descriptions students are putting in for each thing, and so you get this really cool interactive timeline with that also has networks involved and that also has a mapping function. So, you know, more kind of visualization in Scalar, and I don't know if there's other platforms that do everything, you know, probably not, but would be cool. But I think you can probably could create visualizations and move them in, but I don't know if they would maintain their interactivity, you know, or we can link to other things too. But that's the kind of stuff I'd like to see the students do more with. But Scalar, I assume, will probably continue to increase its, you know. So see, as you can see, I'm always like the one where it would be cool if it could do this, but I don't know the technology, so I'm having to like, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on that because we've also been using Scalar in our classrooms to work with bringing students together with primary 20th century documents, archival materials, which I'd love to talk to you more about. But I was talking with the Scalar tech folks, and they were telling me that the most common kind of best practice seems to be to have a local instance hosted by the libraries.
Yeah.
And this seems like a really great opportunity for UT libraries, since Scalar is so popular in our classrooms to centralize this work a little more, and then we would have more back-end control and more sort of longevity. Is that something you all have thought about?
Maybe Ian can answer that. But
We did have an instance on the UC libraries, but it's no longer maintained, is my understanding. So I think it's more of an issue to people maintaining the servers, or kind of a back-end issue that's a little bit beyond our control at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah, I always have that worry of like you create a collection and then that's no longer support. Whatever you put it in is no longer supported, or that kind of thing, you know. So hopefully, I mean, having everything in Texas ScholarWorks makes it nice, because then we don't have to depend so much on if something happened to that platform. I guess we can just create a new one. But yeah, I think it's a lot of people are using it. So it's, you know, I mean, to be honest, Ian did most of the technical work within or with Scalar, so I'm not really sure exactly how user-friendly it is. I was like, so can you put this in, you know? But, you know, I think it's something that we can definitely, do you think it's something like easy enough for sort of any student to use?
I think so,
yeah.
I've used it with Megan Forbes's class.
Uh-huh.
She was a former lecturer here. And she had her undergraduate students work with Scalar directly, and they all found it very easy to use.
Oh, good. And with Vlad, did you use it too, or a different one?
We used Omeka.
Omeka. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Ian's been working with a couple of our faculty on projects, which is really exciting.
Just another question with regard to the student experience. It sounds with the undergraduates this would be a cool thing. You would probably be the coolest professor in town because you do. But without facilities and classrooms in the buildings where you would otherwise teach, you would become increasingly more dependent on spaces like this, which for now at least is here only. So how do you go back? How do you walk back?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've been agitating in every possible circle to get more spaces with, I mean, at least kind of movable tables and chairs. We also have set up in our own department, Hillary just left, so she knows about this, a smaller, because, you know, we have only so much space and also money for technology, but we set up a small kind of digital lab that we call the Fusion Room, where we have just kind of one of these screens, but it, you know, we have it enabled for laptops, and then we have several other computers and actually movable tables and chairs. So the capacity is much smaller, but my idea is, you know, whatever size class you have, you could also have smaller groups come and meet there and do their projects. We also hold office hours there and that kind of stuff. So if everything can't happen in the classroom, because in certain classrooms they could just be on their, like not necessarily working in teams or groups, but they could have their laptops working on something. They could work with the people next to them, that kind of thing, which is not ideal. But yeah, I think the thing is, more people who want to do this kind of thing, the library space becomes more and more critical, if not just having more classrooms. So I think it's a problem in the liberal arts, because we're trying to encourage this kind of innovation in the classroom, but the space that's available, I mean, the smaller seminar rooms are fine. It's when you get bigger, when you get above kind of 25, 30 people. Most of these classrooms are nailed down chairs facing forward. You know, it's very much like, how are we supposed to teach the kids of the 21st century in classrooms from the 19th century? So, but being able to use these library lab rooms has been a great thing. But yeah, one wonders whether the pressure on them might become too great at a certain point where they're just not going to be available, you know. So I think and some departments do have more of their own labs of different kinds. I know, like in anthropology, in the new, like in the CLA, they have lots of rooms that are outfitted that way, and then different kinds of labs of different kinds. But in history, no. English, no. And these are two of the biggest departments in the liberal arts, you know. Slavic, no, you know, except for our own little one. So it's a challenge, but I think there's ways you can do it by kind of breaking them down, divide and conquer. into smaller groups if you need to. It's just hard to assign meeting times outside of class time for students. So, but I think there's ways you could do it where you break off a small group of them if you have a TA that, and you kind of rotate. But even in the nailed down chairs room, sometimes I'm just like, gather in your groups and make it work, and they have to sort of hover around the chairs, But when we do the assignments, usually we've been able to get these spaces. So we've been lucky in getting the spaces as we've needed them. But if everyone starts doing it, it's going to get harder. But but still it would be good. Are there any other questions?
Can I ask just one?
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, Mary, if this, thinking back about what sort of inspired you to start doing this in the first place, and knowing the Title VI proposals, assuming that our government wants to support.
Which Trump does not, because he cut it out of the budget, but okay.
But I believe.
Mm-hmm.
So would you imagine, do you think you achieved the goal that you wanted 4 years ago? And would you also write this into your next grant proposal, continuing to build it? Or would there be something more sexy for the next round?
No, I think this is about as sexy as it gets. No, no, I mean, I think the expansion of it into the broader, which we're already doing, but like making it this broader kind of Cold War project that crosses all these different countries. I think expanding, I mean, it's the fact that it's open source is great because these, they want the federal funds to have as big an impact as possible. Maybe there's ways that we can do more. I don't know if we count hits or, that kind of thing, like where we can track a little bit better the impact or make those connections to K through 12 outreach, which is one of their priorities usually. So build a little bit more of that, which would be pretty easily doable, I think. So yeah, no, this is definitely going in. So I'm going to update on kind of where we are, and this is where we're going. But I'm open to ideas on ways to make it more, because I mean, their priorities are really, obviously education, because this is a Department of Education grant, and kind of globalizing education. But like I said, also K through 12 outreach is one of the things they do. And then training people in areas of national need, which is usually business and education, but also kind of security or sort of State Department. I think for that goal, it's actually really great because you can just see this process of this decision being made and all this intelligence being gathered and all the different viewpoints on what should we do. And so actually a lot of our MA students have dual degrees with the LBJ school. And so with them, I thought it was really great for them to kind of go through these and look, because it's like, this is what happens. This is how different people, they gather intelligence, they come in, they try and convince the president of this is what we should do, or other national security players. And you can see a lot of the big players, Walt Rostow and others coming in and going, no, our détente is the Soviets, we're trying to have better relationship with the Soviets. We're trying to initiate détente. We're trying to put into place arms control. We're in the middle of Vietnam War, but still that's a proxy war, and we're really trying to, so this is not, we have to let them do this, basically. We can't stick our necks out. So I think that there's a lot for, that on the policy end that I can also kind of stress. But as far as on the technology end, I'm open to any suggestions on, and maybe you can think bigger than I on how to make it sound more, I keep using words like innovation in my proposal, because I'm already writing it. But I mean, we have to write this proposal not knowing if this grant's actually going to run, because by the time they send the call out, you have 2 weeks, because OSP needs it 2 weeks later. Trump just cut it out of his budget that he just put in completely. But it was cut out of his budget last year, and it was put back in. So I don't, I'm just kind of ignoring that and moving forward, basically.
I was just
Yeah.
thinking about, when you were talking about, I wonder if Robert Mueller has data visualization people on his staff. And I was thinking, well,
Mhm.
the technology end is part of what you're teaching is the use of the tools for data visualization.
Mm-hmm.
So that is an outcome.
Yeah.
Unintended, probably. But
That makes sense, because that's not something I really talked about in the other proposal, like how it would be used specifically, besides having it be kind of available, you know. But I didn't really talk about how it would be integrated into kind of the curriculum, which there's a whole section we do on curriculum, and talk more about teaching students specifically about kind of, you know, digital literacy and visualization and all these things in classrooms using this kind of collection. So yeah, so that, okay, I'm gonna write it. That makes a lot of sense. But yeah, like showing the bigger kind of purpose of it, besides just having it be there, yeah, for people to use. Did someone have their hand up over here? I thought I saw, no.
I was like on the tip of a question. I was trying to formulate it better. But I guess thinking along like what's already kind of been said, like I was wondering what other ways, like you have your grading obviously and seeing how your debates and your like the scholarship and essays they produce, like how that goes as far as like assessing their experience. But I was wondering if there's other ways you've like assessed kind of students' experience using the archive or like engaging with it. And maybe like ways or if you have any like qualitative data on that that could also be used in like grants in the future too.
Yeah, no, I haven't really thought about that, but that makes sense. You know, just talk to them about, well, and also I'd like to compare the kind of the archival experience of going over and physically pulling out a box and opening it up and what that means to the experience of looking into this. And it's always like interesting because I'm like, just dive in there and start. And they're like, how do I, you know, start looking for this, start looking for that. But it is kind of good to also have them read something about the period or read something, someone who's used that kind of document to make an argument. But yeah, about their sort of experience, I think that's important because it's about them actually, instead of someone just sort of telling them, this is history and this is what happened, they become a historian. You know, this is what historians do. They become actively involved in that process of connecting the dots. And I think that that's like, even if they're not going to be a historian, I always give them the speech about how like, I mean, what historians do is synthesize large amounts of information. As opposed to, let's say, literary scholars who do more of a deep reading. And we do, I think, deep readings of certain documents, but we read thousands of documents, you know, and so that's really what is an important skill in the information age, is to be able to look at this huge amount of information and then cull, like, what are the most important things? And how do they come together? And how do we connect the dots? And how can we look at these things, bits of information critically? And how can we take these primary sources and look at them in relation to a secondary source, someone else that looked at them and has something completely different to say about them? So I think there's a bunch of like good skills that can come out of that as far as their, you know, classroom experience of working with like real, you know, primary documents. I think they also they know who LBJ is. They've, you know, there's a way in which it connects really locally to them. I mean, not just as Texans, but, you know, with this question here, but as Americans, because otherwise it's so distant. It's like Czechoslovakia, what's that? And then they realize that Americans cared and were involved and were making decisions that, you know, they can kind of connect in a way. So I think there's a lot in it for them, you know, pedagogically. So yeah, so it's fun. Are there any other questions or any suggestions? And if anyone wants to email me, it's really helpful for me, both in writing this grant, but also just thinking about ways to use these in teaching, or what I hope is going to be a more kind of public scholarship that we can put on our webpage of ways people have kind of processed a lot of this and visualized it or written about it, or, you know, that kind of thing.
Where would you publish? an article about this experience working with the libraries. And I'm asking this maybe selfishly because I'm looking around the room and most of us here work in the libraries, and we love to know and love to see faculty getting actively involved and our librarians actively involved in the resources and bringing it to life and utilizing it very differently, just as you've explained. Many other faculty don't see the value of spaces like this because it means something else has to be sacrificed for it. So how do you as a faculty member, where could you publish, how would you be able to share this more broadly with colleagues?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think because I think it could be both in a sort of general kind of liberal arts, or actually I think the best way to go about it is in some sort of history pedagogy type of journal, or even just on our own departmental kind of, not even past. We have a lot on history and pedagogy there. But there's probably other journals that I don't know about that because I haven't really written in terms of like teaching experience. I haven't in the past published on that. But honestly, I guess I think more in terms of my own department and how it would benefit people, because there are definitely people in my department doing, if not this, other things that are just really innovative and different. But on the other hand, I do think that the bulk of the faculty, particularly in the larger class, anything larger than a seminar, are mainly lecturing, And I kind of found that out too during the Eyes on Teaching, where I went to 2 different history classes, and they were great lecturers, but it was basically just lectures. And I was a little surprised. And in the conversations after with different people, I was like, have you ever tried this? And they were like, well, how would I fit in? Because I need to cover like all these events. And I don't have time to break out of my lectures and do something else. And I was just like, sometimes less is more. Like, I mean, we don't have to cover, this is not how students learn. Like, they need sometimes to, come to the content in a different way, to process the content in a different way. And actually, I think as historians, we can condense, because there are some classes where you're covering 500 years in a semester, and there's some classes where you're covering 50 years in a semester. So, you can condense or leave out certain things, and then at least, weave in more of these other kind of methods. So, yeah, I think getting to sort of departments that aren't as initiated into the possibilities, but I think for them to see concrete examples is the biggest thing. Because once you do, you kind of go, oh, okay, I get it. But in thinking about this, because I've been thinking about it a lot, and I'm kind of off answering your question in a way, but is I think for faculty who, like, let's say just lecture in those bigger classes, for them to kind of realize that actually it's easier and more rewarding, and for both you and the students, to kind of put some of it in their hands, Now, but there's a risk, and it's kind of like one of the classes I visited was a business class, so I picked up some of their terminology. But there's like switching costs to you. So I'm used to doing my lecture. I can do my lecture. It's easy. I don't have to worry that, it's draining in a way, but it's also like I don't have to worry about things not working out or what the students are going to do. I don't have to prepare anything else. I can just give my lecture. But there's a certain switching cost to a new environment where you have to create teams, you have to book a room, you have to meet over there, you have to come up with the idea, and you have to make it happen. But for me, when I've done it, it's like, oh my God, this is so great. Why didn't I do this before? Like, it's more fun for me, it's more fun for the students, they're getting more out of it. And so there's a way in which people have to kind of drink the Kool-Aid. But I think part of that is seeing an example and going, oh, wow, that was so great. Now I want to do that.
It'd be interesting to do a research control study of a class using the lecture versus what you're doing, and see where the students fall on that continuum. think always back on when we started doing reserves, analog reserves,
Mhm.
and then when we started doing e-reserves, where the students can sit in their PJs before they come to class, and they have to come and rush before somebody else picked up the reading. That sort of forced the issue for the professors to follow suit and say, wait a minute, Professor Neuburger, let us read it in our PJs because it's electronically available. You know, why can you do your readings that way too? So I'm just interested in the student learning outcomes in terms of how that will compare if there were a pilot study of sorts where you and a faculty member would teach similar things, but you would use this style versus the lecture style.
Yeah, I think that would be really interesting. But what I found is that the students coming out of the high school environment, and especially these are really high achieving students here at UT, they're ready for this. You go get in your team, and they're like, okay, you know, and there they are. It's almost like they've been doing this since they were in daycare. You know, like they know. I mean, they've been in schools where K through 12, where they have these. I think they're much more pedagogically trained, frankly, you know, and where they do that kind of stuff, and they do team projects, and they do all these different things, and so students.
And they have movable chairs.
That's right, they have movable chairs, and so it's true, and so students are ready for it, and they just jump right in. And so the faculty need to realize that, no, these students are ready for this. All you have to do is set them loose, give them a challenge, let them go for it, and it's really rewarding to, you know, see what they come up with. You're like, oh my God, this is amazing. You know, you just throw it at them, and they do really well. So yeah, so I've enjoyed this process a lot, and I'm excited to just keep pushing it further. It's almost like you can't really teach a class in the same way again once you've kind of started to do something different. I don't think I can go back to just lecturing, you know. Is our time up? Did I go over? Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. This has been great. Yeah.